Hey guys, welcome back. Woodworking here. Got another Learn from the Pros video for you today. We're going to be looking at why TSM was able to run Captain Koshka and why you shouldn't do the same thing. First of all, don't take it from me. Here's straight from FlashX's mouth. He says, I do not encourage anyone to play Captain Koshka. It requires a very coordinated team with some form of voice communication to work. Here's a couple more things from the community as a whole that were referencing that specific Captain Koshka. It's not super important what people had to say about it, but I think there are some things we can take away from this game and why it was successful and why it usually won't be. So that's why I'm picking it as a topic for a video. One more thing I'd like to add is I do have a bit of experience running Captain Koshka. I used to use it as a challenge to myself when I'd get bored playing the meta captains. So I have played it myself long before this ever happened. This was months ago. But just know I'll be bringing that experience into what I'm telling you as well. So I don't have access into the mines, and I haven't talked to TSM about why they did this, but first of all, I think the biggest reason for them doing this was a draft strategy. It wasn't a planned thing that they went into this game knowing they were going to run Roam Koshka. I believe that when they drafted, they picked Koshka specifically as a denial pick to keep it away from Cloud9. It wasn't planned as a we're going to run Roam Koshka right off the bat. And even when they picked it, I'm not sure if they planned on roaming it initially. Now here's a big part of why I think that's the case. In the game before the game they ran Roam Koshka, that game was game 3. So the game before, game 2, Cloud9 drafted Idris, Catherine, and Koshka and absolutely stomped TSM. I'm not going to say it was, you know, a murder. It wasn't like Cloud9 playing a non-pro team, but in the course of the highest tier of gameplay in Vainglory, which is what TSM versus Cloud9 is, it was a pretty bad beating. And part of that is how strong Koshka is when she's put onto junglers at this high level. So if we go into game 3 with the understanding that this game just took place right before the game 3 draft, and you know that Idris, Catherine, Koshka stomped TSM right before, let's look at the game 3 draft. So this draft started with Ban Grace, Ban Vox, pick Idris, and then TSM picked Baron into Idris, who's generally considered a counter to Baron. And then TSM banned Grumpjaw, and Cloud9 banned Lyra. So the two best captains right now, Grace and Lyra, are off the board. And instead of giving Cloud9 Koshka, which, as I said, they just did very well with, and who also is really good into Baron because she can jump on him and do burst damage, they grab Koshka, to what I believe, to deny Cloud9 that pick. And then Cloud9 picks Catherine Glaive, assuming, and generally rightfully so, that TSM is going to jungle Koshka. And so once TSM had the thought, hey, we can roam Koshka, there's a lot of stuff they could have done here. They could have gone, Rhyme would have been a great choice too in triple melee. But so they go Cruel, and Cruel made kind of an emergence in this this whole weekend, actually. So something must have happened in the Scrim meta that made Cruel start getting picked. Somebody must have ran him well that made him have an emergence, because across the board we saw him a couple times this weekend. It wasn't just in this game. But either way, he's really good into Glaive and Idris. His weakness stacks are good at lowering Idris's damage, and he's tanky, so while everybody's focusing Baron, which they should be, Cruel is just putting down major stacks on somebody and can basically delete a target before, either if they kill Baron before Cruel is able to kill one of the others, then he's going to take that target down quickly. And when Cruel gets into a 2v2 situation where it's him and his captain versus anybody else and their captain, especially melee heroes, he's in a pretty good spot. Because, as you should know, Cruel can pretty much 1v1 any hero in the game. So 2v2 with a captain left on the board, he's in a really good spot. So to sum that whole monologue up, this was a targeted pick by TSM, picking Koshka, and the plan wasn't to run Captain Koshka. I don't believe it could have been. They could just have this in the bag. But if it was even if it was a planned Rome Koshka, they're doing this because they're way ahead in the point standings. They're against the next best team. So even if they drop this game 3 against Cloud9, nothing's really going to change in the standings. Both teams are both going to the live championships, the live summer championships, as teams 1 and 2. So there's really no risk for TSM, even if they did whip this out as a planned thing. But I just don't believe that TSM is putting that much effort into learning Rome Koshka as a viable strategy. So the reason you shouldn't do this, number one, is Rome Koshka in this game was specifically a targeted denial pick TSM used against Cloud9. So don't do it, reason number one. Now let's get into the game and talk about what Koshka brings and doesn't bring to the fold as a captain. So what does Rome Koshka bring to the game for her team? So utility-wise, she brings very little. She does have her ultimate, which is pretty much it. And it's really one of the longest stuns in the game, if not the longest, seconded only probably by Cruel hitting full-length ultimate of his own. But it's also very easy to block. In fact, the way I learned how to reflex block in this game was by blocking Koshka's ultimate, because it's that telegraphed and that easy to block. So on her own, in most comps, she's not going to be effective. One of the reasons she was in this game specifically is because there's also Cruel's ultimate to block, and if target selection can be randomized by the person playing Captain Koshka, then that can also bring an element of surprise that makes it a little harder to block as well. Another thing she helped out with specifically in this game is she has a super strong early game. Even without damage items built on her kit, her level 1 and 2 is crazy strong. And I think because Cruel and Baron both have a really weak early game, she helped mitigate some of the earlier game aggression that Cloud9 probably would have wanted to put down, because she's just so effective even without damage items. And you can see on the screen right now, Cloud9 thought they could go in and invade after TSM got a kill and poured it home, but they can't. Koshka's just too much speed, too much utility, early game, I should say, and too much damage. She just forces them right out of the jungle. They can, Catherine and a Glaive cannot fight a Cruel and a Koshka pretty much at any point throughout the game, but especially early game. They win that. TSM wins that fight early. And so I don't know if you watch this game, but if you watch the whole game, you'll see there's very little jungle pressure applied to TSM. And by the time Cloud9 would want to start putting down that pressure, Cruel's just too much for them. Way too much for them. So why does Koshka suck at it as a captain? Well, like I said, her ultimate's incredibly easy to block. So if it does get blocked and this game moves on to when most team fights happen, which is mid-game and beyond, she doesn't bring that much to the fold. She's very naturally squishy. And so even with the rest of the items built in her kit that a captain would build, and for the most part, Flash Axe does build just a pretty standard captain itemization build. There's nothing too fancy until the very end. And so even with those items, she's very squishy. So you have to use your speed to dodge things like the chakram, and so she can't really frontline. And luckily, there wasn't much to frontline for in this game. Like, there's no directionally targeted abilities that you'd want your roam to block, like one shot, one kill, like Spitfire, those type of abilities. So in comps like that, where you're playing against those type of heroes, Roam Koshka is absolutely horrible because she's not going to be able to frontline any of that damage for your team before she gets too low to actually be helpful with her activatables. And so in this game, Von C on Cruel actually ends up doing most of the frontlining. And Cruel can do that, but you'll see in quite a few fights that I'm going to show you, Von C almost died. I mean, he was within 100 health of dying before he got brought back to health, for either from him using his health barrier on his A, or getting the heal back from his B, or all of Flash's activatables. And so it was really a lot of the fights, and if in a couple fights he actually did die, but it was really dicey whether he was going to live or not. Having your jungler frontline like that, who's one of your main damage dealers, you know, obviously we all know is really bad, or can be bad. It wasn't in this game; they pulled it off. But the reason it wasn't in this game is because Cloud9's win condition is to jump on Baron and delete him. So if they're targeting all their damage onto Cruel, that's what TSM wants. That's how TSM wins the game, is by keeping Baron alive. Now, while I was just talking, TSM actually killed Old School again and was able to land Koshka's ultimate on him, and he didn't block it. His block was late. So it's like I said, I mean, he's a professional. If anybody can block Koshka ultimates, it's him, but they just caught him off guard. That's all it was. And there you see again, they caught him off guard. Koshka's ability to jump in there with Cruel and the CC that Cruel brings is a good thing. And one other thing that Koshka does well, and it's not super important this game, but you know, if you don't listen to me and you don't listen to Flash X and you want to run Koshka, one other thing she can do really well is jump on a target to land Atlas. Not as important against Idris as it is against especially ranged heroes, but something to keep in mind that she does do well. So let's look at a few mid-game fights and talk about why Roam Koshka didn't hurt them in this game, but keep in mind all those things I said why Roam Koshka happened to work this time. You know, it's not that this is going to work every time. This is a very specific draft that I ended up working with. And, you know, I'm not even sure TSM thought about all these parameters when they picked her, but it just happened to work out this time. This fight happens at the 9-minute mark, and TSM sees that Cloud9's in TSM's mustache bush, and this is where they want to fight, right? If TSM starts losing this fight, they can run to their turret. If they're winning the fight, Cloud9 has farther to go, and you'll see that once Cloud9 starts trying to kite because the burst AoE damage from Baron is too much for him, that's when TSM's ultimates come out. And Joseph doesn't block the Cruel ultimate, but does block the Koshka ultimate, and it's just too much. If either one lands on any of their players, they're dead, because you can't just sit there and take Cruel damage with a great finish move and Baron's, you know, continuous burst damage. Nobody can survive that. And so that's pretty much TSM's win condition. Keep Baron alive and then isolate a target with their ultimates. And throughout the game, every fight they win, that's what. So here's a fight a couple minutes later where TSM is trying to siege Cloud9's turret. As you can see, it's very low. And Flash X does a kind of unpredictable ultimate, and he lands it on Joseph. And the reason he lands it is because Joseph's under turret, and he's probably not thinking that Flash is going to do that right then. And they almost kill Joseph, but he gets to safety thanks to Gabe. And Gabe kind of wastes his ultimate there. I think he thought maybe TSM was going to engage on them because the turret was low, but TSM was just biding their time, and luckily they were able to bait out the silence, and Flash had already used his Crucible, so there was no chance for him to use he used his Crucible to block Atlas and stun from Catherine, because I assumed too that Gabe was going to use his stun on Flash, but he went straight for Best Chuck and tried to land an Atlas on him. So either way, Flash blocked both of those with his Crucible, which was a good usage of it, because at that time they thought they were going to kill Joseph. But anyways, they bide their time, they wait out the silence, and then they go in and wait. And by that time, TSM still has Fountain and Cloud9 does not, and so they siege. And it's one of those times again where I tell you, Cruel's getting bursted, but right before he gets bursted, he kills Glaive. And had Flash not gotten greedy there at the end, they won that fight. I think they still probably won that fight, even giving over the ace, because they got a turret out of it and they traded. If you trade and get a turret, you won that fight. So the ace didn't really cost TSM anything. And so overall, long term, they won that fight for sure. And you know, with a Roam Koshka, they won that fight. Here's the last fight I'm going to show you, and I just wanted to bring this one up because defensively speaking, Cloud9 does everything they can correctly. They block out the Koshka ultimate. Catherine gets in there and reflects some of Baron's double burst damage, but what they don't do correct is the offensive side of it. They put down no damage on Baron during this fight. The only damage that went down on him was reflected damage from Catherine's bubble. And it doesn't, even if Cruel had died here, TSM still wins this fight because they're not putting any damage down on Baron. And the win conditions against pretty much any Baron comp are to kill Baron first. And Cloud9 can't get to him. Their one chance there was to afterburn him, and because of how much pressure Cruel and Koshka to some extent were putting on them, they weren't able to get into a position to afterburn Best Chuck. And you know, part of that credit goes to him and his positioning, but the larger part of it was just compositionally how much trouble they would have getting there. And the other thing about it is if he misses, you know, that's Glaive's only high mobility move. If he misses, then he's just out on an island on his own, and Cruel's just going to devastate him between Cruel and Baron. So, like I said, to sum this all up, this was a very situational draft and comp that made Koshka effective as a captain. So generally speaking, don't run this. If you have a group of people that you play with, like Flash said, if you're on communications and you have a group of people you play with and you want to run this as like a challenge to yourself, like I used to, feel free. It'll test your captain chops, if you will. And one good thing about it is it helps you focus on your activatables. So, you know, if you're tier 8, tier 9 and you want to give this a try, that's the range I would say this could be effective at. Outside of that range, either higher or lower, you may have a lot of trouble making this successful, even if you are with a team. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. I hope you learned something. I hope I shed some light on why it worked in this game. You know, I hate when things are just left at, hey, don't do this, because that doesn't help anybody learn anything. You don't know why it worked. Was it just luck? It wasn't just luck. And I hope I kind of enlightened a few of you on to why it worked this time and why you shouldn't run it most of the time, and especially generally speaking. Anyways, as always, I'll see you guys on the fold.